Chapter 2 of The Mystery of the Broken Mirror is called Naming the Mystery. I vividly remember one of my maths teachers when I was at school telling the story of Flatland. He drew some flat people, the inhabitants of Flatland and their flatmates, that was his joke, not mine, on the blackboard. We had blackboards in those days, explaining that these were two-dimensional people. And not only did they have left-handed and right-handed people, but also left-facing and right-facing ones too. They looked something like this. That's sort of what he drew on the board. There's a left-facing and a right-facing person. The limitations of their lifestyle should be evident. They had terrible trouble talking to one another because they could only talk face-to-face with those of their fellow citizens whose face pointed in the opposite direction to their own. Right facers could only engage in conversation with their fellow right facers if one of them was prepared to stand on his or her head. This was the source of endless arguments, as you can imagine, into which left facers would become involved as referees and go-betweens. One day, an alien came into the mad world of Flatland. He claimed to have come from a world with 3 dimensions, whatever that might mean. And he had some very, very peculiar habits. He seemed to be able to face both ways, though not, of course, at the same time. Certainly, he seemed to be able to decide at will whether to be a right facer or a left facer. He also had this alarming habit of disappearing, God knows where, and then reappearing again. A habit which was particularly infuriating if you were talking with him, only to realise that he'd somehow removed himself to the back of you without going round in the usual way. Moreover, he had this knack of making bits of himself disappear. One minute he was shaking your hand, the next minute he had no hands at all, or he was tapping you on the back of the neck while standing in front of you. Very, very curious. They thought he was some sort of an angel because they couldn't understand what he meant by another dimension. Unlike the Flatlanders, we, of course, are used to 3 dimensions, and our primary contact with the 3-dimensional world of our experience is through our senses. We see, we touch, we hear, we taste, we smell our environment. And based on the evidence of our senses, we name and categorize its contents in the way in which I described in the first chapter. Notwithstanding the fact that our senses often play tricks on us, some would say that the evidence of our senses is the only information about the world on which we can rely. Everything else is subjective and impossible to verify. This is surely a case of Flatlander syndrome, allowing our limitations to restrict our understanding. In fact, if we stop to think about it, we already live in a kind of 4th dimension of experience, namely the dimension of time. As well as being aware that an object occupies 3-dimensional space, I'm also able to observe change that takes place in that object from one moment in time to another, and sequence those changes in my mind. It's interesting to reflect how people down the ages have sought to capture and reproduce these dimensions of our experience. Paper, canvas, and photographic film have enabled 2-dimensional stills of our environment to be produced. The advent of the movie allowed those images, still 2-dimensional, to change and interact in the dimension of time. Achieving the same effect with the third dimension has proved more elusive. But we're on the verge of getting there, aren't we? Until the age of computer graphics came along, we had to be satisfied with the use of perspective in graphic art to give us an idea, an image, an illusion, if you like, of 3 dimensions. Or perhaps the offerings of sculpture to reproduce that third dimension. But now the age of virtual reality is upon us. Are we then truly master of our dimensions for the first time? Art, however, from primitive cave painting to computer-produced moving graphics, is not simply engaged in the task of creating faithful and lifelike reproductions of the world around us. The artist also seeks to interpret his or her perceptions of the world and arouse feelings in the beholder. In this way, the artist makes use of the given dimensions to touch deeper aspects of human experience. The artist reminds us that we relate to the world around us in ways which go beyond space and time alone. We experience much that is of great significance to us through our emotional and intuitive senses. How I feel about a person goes beyond how they look, what their voice sounds like, whether they suffer from bodily odour, though any of all of these things may affect my feelings about them. The old saying, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, serves as a reminder that though the image of light which enters 2 different eyes may be identical, the inner responses to that image will almost certainly be different. The relationship between a person and their environment is as much determined by emotional responses as by sensual ones. In that respect, seeing is not believing. For we cannot see beauty. We cannot see love, or happiness, or peace, or joy, or hope, and a whole range of emotions and conditions in the same way that I can see my hand or feel the wind on my face. We nevertheless know when they are there or when they're not there. And this presence or absence makes quite a difference to our lives. Ideas such as unwrapping the mystery of God or encountering God are actually very difficult ideas for most of us to understand. After all, we consume enough of our mental and emotional energy trying to come to terms with that more immediate mystery that we call life. Bringing God into the equation seems to make things more complicated than they already are. It is perhaps for this reason that just as many people endeavour to cope with life by living at a distance from their feelings, so many prefer to suppress their innate faith in God. In this respect, we differ from the Flatlanders. They had no conception at all of another dimension. It was completely beyond their experience. We humans already believe, I would argue, almost instinctively that life is somehow more complex and more mysterious than our limitations allow us to fully experience. Moreover, it could be argued that we often make a deliberate choice to restrict our perception, to blind ourselves to the mysterious enormity of reality in order to cope with the more immediate demands of life. Here, at this point, we stand at the very threshold of faith. Faith recognizes the mystery of life, recognizes the limitations, often self-imposed, of our perception of reality, and gives the mystery a name. Naming the mystery enables us to make a response to it. Like Moses on the mountain in Exodus chapter 3, confronted by the presence of the mystery of God in the burning bush, we need to name the mystery. Moses said to God, "If I go to the Israelites and tell them that the God of their forefathers has sent me to them, and they ask me his name, what shall I say?" God answered, "I am what I am. Tell them, I am has sent you to them." Or like Jacob in Genesis chapter 28, in the desert. We awake from sleep, rub our eyes, and look at the familiar and quite ordinary scene around us with new and enlightened eyes, the eyes of faith. Jacob says, "Truly the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. How fearsome is this place! This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven." Where was he? Right in the middle of the desert, in the middle of nowhere. In order to perceive reality and experience life fully in all its dimensions, we need to be aware of the presence of mystery, of that which is present, but which is beyond us. In other words, in our perception of reality, we're drawing a larger circle, which contains the much smaller circle of the immediate reality of space and time. Here's space and time. Here's the larger reality beyond it. That's true in human experience. Our immediate experience, we believe, is part of a larger mystery. A mystery which contains us, but which is not itself contained or even containable. The inner circle of our experience of space and time is actually an artificial one. It represents only our human limitations, our limited perceptions. To see beyond the inner circle requires vision, a new and unrestricted way of seeing. That concept of vision, a new way of seeing, recalls one of my favourite modern Christian hymns, which is based upon an ancient Irish prayer and begins with the words, "Be thou my vision, O Lord of my heart." Those words always intrigue me because they have a double meaning. And both meanings have something important to say, and they can be interpreted both ways. The words are an invocation to God, praying that God may ever be present to my sight, but also that I may see in the way that God sees. Vision can mean both what I see and the way in which I see. As I seek to observe the mystery of God, I discover that God is to be found on both sides of the circle. God is in my very act of seeing, as well as the object of my sight. So, we've encountered the mystery. Or rather, the mystery has encountered us. We've caught a glimpse of God. Or God has directed our glimpsing. And as an act of faith, we have named the mystery. It's the ultimate act of naming, the end and goal of the process on which my son embarked with his concept of DITS. Now, some people would argue here that in naming the mystery, they would prefer not to use God language at all. Like the great English poet William Wordsworth, confronted by the mystery of reality, they'd prefer perhaps to speak of, I quote here from Wordsworth Prelude, Book 1, "Wisdom and spirit of the universe, thou soul that art the eternity of thought, that givest to forms and images a breath and everlasting motion." Whether we use traditional God language at all, we need to be aware that these words we use are still only packaging. What matters is our awareness of and our encounter with the reality, the desire to know and be known.